On to the main story of the day. And while Westminster is busy talking about Rwanda and migrants like normal, the Labour campaign boss, Jonathan Ashworth, has been touring bingo halls in Doncaster, talking about pensions instead. Now, it would seem, Ash, this is entirely like off-piste and an odd thing to be doing when everyone else is talking about Rwanda. What's he up to and why is he doing it?
It's not odd at all when you consider Labour strategy. So yesterday, the Daily Mirror went with Jonathan Ashworth to a bingo hall in Doncaster, where he met with pensioners, and he even had a go at reading out some of the numbers. He asked people in the audience whether they wanted him to read out the old style phrases when it comes to bingo, and there was quite a lot of cheer in the audience. Actually, they were quite into that. Though for when he was reading out number 88, he said 2 people, which was a bit of.
Didn't say 2 fat ladies. He said 2 differently shaped people of indeterminate gender. Oh, dear.
Exactly. So then, obviously, he was there to highlight this long-term unfunded ambition of Jeremy Hunt and Rishi Sunak to eventually scrap national insurance in its entirety. Labour have done some sums on this, and they reckon it could leave a £46 billion black hole in the public finances. And basically what they're saying is that without the government setting how they're going to spend this, how they're going to get this money back, how they're going to fund this pledge, they're either going to have to raise taxes, cut pensions, or raise the state pension age. Now, obviously, the Tories are denying this. They're just saying it's scaremongering from Labour. But Jonathan Ashworth is adamant. He's saying we're seeing Rishi Sunak repeat the same mistakes as Liz Truss, playing fast and loose with the public finances. And yesterday, he even came armed with this sort of 1980s secret memo from Nigel Lawson to his former Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher, which warned against merging national insurance with income tax, saying it would create many losers, including retirees. So he was like, so we're warning Britain's pensioners that the future of the pension is not safe in Tory hands. Obviously, it's worth pointing out that Labour and the Tories do have quite similar policies when it comes to pensioners. Both of the parties have committed to keeping the triple lock on state pensions for the next 5 years of the Parliament if they win the election. And but it's also part of this Labour's sort of moving to an over 65 strategy, because it's the only part of the population that's not leading the Tories in the polls. I think they're about 6 points behind the Conservative Party when it comes to this sort of proportion of the population. So obviously in that context, and with the local elections happening tomorrow, they're now turning their strategy onto retirees. And
they want to bang the old pensions drum a bit, don't they? So what do you think, everybody? Are you worried about a possible end to the state pension? You worried about where the money to pay for it is going to be coming from? Because, as Ash has said, both main parties keep talking about increasing it, but the numbers of people to pay for it keep decreasing. So what we've got local elections tomorrow. If you're getting ready to vote, do let us know how you're going to vote. I voted by post some time ago, so I've forgotten how I voted, actually. But we've got these local elections, which are about how often your bins are collected. But in fact, they're often a bellwether for how people are going to vote nationally, or whether you want to punish the government for something. We've got a government that wants to talk about immigration, but can't get rid of any migrants. And we've got an opposition which wants to tell pensioners, future pensioners more likely, that their old age income is going to be at risk. But if there's a change of government, Ash, which seems very, very likely, there's no risk of this at all, is there? Why is Labour going to be, I mean, I suppose you've answered the question, but, Labour's banging on about this threat from the Tories, which even if it was true, they couldn't do it immediately. It would be 10 years down the line.
I mean, Jeremy Hunt said that himself, it would be over the course of a decade. So
why aren't Labour actually talking about what they would do instead?
Because I think, you did have this interview with Keir Starmer at the weekend. Sorry, not an interview, it was an article in the Sunday Express where he did commit to keeping the triple lock on state pensions. So this for the cause for a whole 5 years. So that was a pretty major commitment, which cost quite a lot of money. And that was welcomed by sort of Silver Voices, this organisation that represents old people. But it is local elections that's happening tomorrow. So you've got 2,600 council seats across the country up for grabs in about 100 different areas of the country. And then you've also got the Blackpool South by-election, which has been called the forced resignation of a Tory MP in a gambling sting by the Times. And then you've also got these key mayoral battles right across the country, including London, Tees Valley, West Midlands, West Yorkshire. And those are going to sort of trickle in throughout Thursday and Friday and into Saturday and possibly even Sunday. So I think in this last push of the campaign, Labour is seeking to sort of court this over 65 vote.
Yeah, by saying things like we're going to keep the triple lock. Now, Scott just said there, kids now are never going to be able to retire. Now, there are some reasonable fears about pensions maybe disappearing. What do you think, everybody? Do you worry about this? Are you saving for the long term? Do you think that it's going to be unsustainable and you're not going to get a state pension when you're older? Mike says, whoever's in power in 10 years, I dread to think what the state pension system will look like. The ageing demographic, without bringing in younger workers from abroad, will make the whole thing uneconomic. So there is an explainer on the side of the page about this, which basically says, the biggest problem we have with the state pension is we can't afford to keep increasing it, as the politicians and Keir Starmer has just done. So there's not enough younger people paying high enough taxes because of the low wage economy and all the rest of it to fund the older ones, of whom there are more because of the baby boomer generation. So successive governments have kept saying they will increase that pension, and there's nowhere for that money to come from. And so that's why I think I'm right in saying, Ash, that Labour is saying, well, if you cut national insurance, you have to cut the state pension, because you can't get that 46 billion from somewhere else. And it can't, there isn't anywhere else it could possibly be located from, really, within the system. But instead of hitting each other about this, isn't this, as Mike was saying there, isn't it a big enough social issue, really, that there needs to be a cross-party agreement, some kind of, massive royal commission or something to think about the long term and how we're going to deal with this as a society? Or is it just asking too much for them to be grown up about this?
I don't think it's too much. I think in a pre-election period, perhaps it is too much, but the election, you might see more of that sort of cross-party working. And you mentioned that, and it's exactly the same when it comes to social care. The sort of fixing the crisis in social care does require this cross-party working, which has been sort of floated by parties for several years, and nothing has happened with it. We've had the Tory plan to fix fix social care from Boris Johnson on the steps of number 10 in 2019, which never materialised. To be honest, Labour have still got to set out their policies on social care, which I'm sure we'll see more of as the election approaches. But it's an unfortunate situation, and I suspect there will be a debate next year into the state pension and whether Britain can afford it. But I suspect the answer will be yes, given that older voters are so crucial to political.
Exactly, they're the ones.
It is the issue of pensioner poverty is huge as well. I think that has to be kept at the back of people's minds when considering the sort of triple lock in state pensions. Their earnings do need to increase with the price of wages or inflation. Otherwise, you'll have pensioners living in dire straits of poverty, which you already get now, because there's also a gap between the old state pension and the new state pension of about £50-60 a week. So.
Oh yeah, it didn't rise for a very long time during the 70s and 80s. So it was very grim. I can remember my grandparents struggling on it a lot. Scott says progressive taxation with no upper limits would be a good start. Tax the billionaires, like it, Scott. I think we had a comment from Lindsay, which sort of was up briefly and then disappeared again. Could we possibly have her back? Lindsay says, we need a government who can successfully manage the country and stimulate a healthy revenue. Wouldn't that be nice? I suppose one of the things I've got to ask, Ash, and it's an impossible question, I doubt you'll be able to answer, but we've got some big issues, haven't we? Like Lindsay's just mentioned, and that you said, social care, pensions, stimulating the economy, whether or not we have to align more with the EU, all the rest of it. Are we in a position, you think, because we're in an election year, where Labour, which is so likely to win, is just being very, very cautious? They don't want to frighten the horses. They're not saying anything that might just get people to vote against. And once they're in power, maybe with a big enough majority that they never need to worry, like for 5 or 10 years, about losing power again, are they then, do you get any sense they're going to start looking at these things, issues of social justice and so on, in a radical enough way that we might actually tackle it? I mean, are they going to just wait till they're in other words, and go, right, gloves off, let's get at it?
I mean, the whole thing of Keir Starmer's leadership is to promise these sort of solutions to fix the problems rather than sticking plaster approach to politics. So one would hope that you would see that sort of approach in government. But I mean, you say they won't be worried about power. I think as soon as they get in power, they will be worried about the next general election. And whether they can sustain the voting coalition they've got behind them in this general election. So that will always be at the back of their mind, securing that second term in office. But I think if he does win the general election, I think the first few couple of months, years will be the most important if he wants to unleash these bold policies and sort of tackle the big issues, because that's when he'll be at his most politically powerful, especially if he secures a majority. So I think we have to wait and see. I think there will be a lot of pressure on him to deliver quite quickly. But as Rachel Reeves keeps reminding the public of the state of the public finances, I think it's going to be, you get the sense that it might be quite slow burning at first while they attempt to repair the public economy.
I'm not sure that's what a lot of people would want. I think there's a situation perhaps we're in where a lot of people want change, regardless of how you vote. And JC says, I'm going to say it, Keir's not going to win. It's possible. Things could still all go horribly wrong. But then we find ourselves in a situation where, the change candidate is Rishi Sunak, who hasn't...
I think he's got that one.
Yeah, hasn't changed very much at all, it's got to be said. So before we move on to good news, let's just quickly talk about tomorrow's local elections. So we've got all these seats up around the country. But last time they were up for a selection, it was about, I think it was 2021. And so at the time, Boris Johnson was riding high. There was the COVID vaccine that had just come out. We had Brexited. There was everything. It was before Partygate. Things were looking good. And so Boris Johnson did quite well. And the Tories did quite well. So it's a high that we're measuring their possible success against this time. And the Tories are going to be very keen to tell us, aren't they, that it's not... That it's not going to be as bad as they think it is. And Labour are trying to manage expectations by saying, well, I don't think it's going to be that much of a clean sweep. There may be other issues. Lib Dems are hoping for just anyone to get a seat anywhere. What's your sense that of how it's going to play out? I mean, how are people feeling in Doncaster? That should be Labour territory. But like you say, they're over 65s and they don't generally vote Labour.
So I had the pleasure of working overnight on Thursday into Friday. And so on Thursday night, you'll get the first third of the council results into Friday morning. So we'll have a clear picture of which way the councils are going by Friday morning, ideally, we hope. But the sort of election analysts have suggested that the Tories could lose anything between 400 and 500 seats, these local elections. As you mentioned, the last time a lot of these were contested was in 2021 with the vaccine bounce from Boris Johnson. And the Labour gains could be anywhere between 200 to 250. And everyone, I think most people in Westminster are expecting the Conservatives to lose the Blackpool South by-election, where they currently have a slim majority. But I think a lot of people are sort of interpreting the mayoral results as significant for Rishi Sunak's leadership himself, because obviously there are these two Tory mayors, Andy Street in the West Midlands and Manhouchen in Tees Valley, according to the polls, seem to be quite close. And I think the Tories were just edging ahead in the latest YouGov poll in the West Midlands. But I think if he loses those votes, those mayoral elections, which I think one of them you'll get the result for on Friday afternoon and the second on Saturday, then expect to see new murmurings in the Tory party about Rishi Sunak's leadership. That'll be the focus. But I think possibly the worst of both worlds for them is that they hang on in those mayoral elections and think that they're on the right track, and sort of put their fingers in their ears at losing 400 to 500 councillors across the country, but take solace from securing 2 mayoral leadership races, which have sort of distanced themselves from the Conservative Party and Rishi Sunak in their campaigning. So it won't, even if they do win, it won't exactly be a huge endorsement of Rishi Sunak's leadership.
No, I mean, Andy Street's website just doesn't make any mention of Rishi Sunak. I think we're with the Conservative Party anymore. It's Andy Street for West Midlands, and that's kind of, it's about personality. Now, Scott said you don't interrupt your enemy when he's making mistakes. I really do think Labour will be radical. I hope it will. But at the moment, you don't interrupt your enemy while they're making mistakes. But then again, if someone is going to get elected, whatever party, on the back of someone else's failure, they do still need to say what it is they're going to be doing after they get in. And I think there's some people who want something quite radical and others who don't want to scare the horses. And Keir's caught between two stools there, doesn't really know quite which way to go. Hopefully there's a plan. We have to wait and see if the election ever gets called.